Okay, I'll call this meeting of the City of Kerrville Planning and Zoning Commission to order at 4:30. Dorothy, will you call roll, please?
Yes, sir. Bob Waller,
Here?
Garrett Harmon,
Here.
Tricia Byram,
Here.
David Jones,
Here.
Rustin Zuber,
Here.
Jim Brown,
Here.
Bill Morgan.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, we do have a quorum, thank you. Item 1 on the consent agenda is the approval of minutes from March 21st, 2019. And it starts on page 3. I'll accept any comments or proposed amendments. And a motion.
I move that we accept and approve the minutes as presented.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Raise your hand. It passes 5-0. Thank you. Consideration and final action. Man, I don't even recognize you. It's been so long since we had a meeting. Drew, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon. This is a consideration and final action on the final plat of the landing subdivision containing approximately 58.739 acres of land out of the Joseph S. Anderson Survey number 141, abstract number 2, and the J.S. Sayder Survey number 142, abstract number 290 in the City of Kerrville, generally located along Thompson Drive and James Road. Preliminary plat was brought to you previously. There's been a few minor changes with some of the street alignments, and staff recommends approval of the plat. I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
All right, there's no public hearing required for this. Commission members, comments?
I know there's been some concern about drainage, but that will be addressed during the development site plan process.
That's correct.
I also see a list of concerns too, but doesn't really pertain to lots. We don't know what's going on these lots, so I'm assuming that these comments came from somebody.
Yes,
Okay.
and the zone case is the next item on the agenda
Okay.
for this property.
Do we have a motion?
I have
Quick question.
Yes.
Access to each side, can you explain the access to the properties on either side?
Yes. Just a second. Find my mouse. There we go. So Thompson Drive is on the lower part of the page here. James Road intersection is right here. So James Road, existing James Road comes down. There'll be an access here down to the park. Knapp Road is currently going to remain at this time. Be an access off of Thompson and this horseshoe here and here. An access point here for the adjacent property owners. And current access would be off Knapp Road for the property owner here. And they also have this property here towards Thompson Road also has an access to Thompson Road. Does that answer your questions? Okay.
And it's our understanding that Knapp Road is not going to be closed until Kerrville Drive is complete.
The applicant is looking to close Knapp Road in the future, but as presented today, Knapp Road will remain open. So that'll be a separate process through City Council
Oh, okay.
at a later date. And yes, the other street and access will have to be accommodated by that
Okay.
point.
Is Knapp Road a city street or a county?
Yes, city street.
City
It has
street.
been annexed.
Say again?
It has been annexed into the city. It is a city street.
And the road on the north and west side is, or the,
This right here.
No, the other side.
This is a private drive,
That's a private drive.
correct.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Any other questions? It has been annexed into the city limits and is now a city road.
That happened when we annexed this property?
That's correct.
Any other questions, comments? If not, do I have a motion?
I'm sorry?
Did you get a chance to comment on this?
The plat's not a public hearing.
The final plat is not a public hearing?
That's correct.
Well, I'd like to comment.
Okay, go ahead.
Please state your name and address, please.
I'm James Bilta. I live at 1520 Knapp Road, which is adjacent to this property, and it is at the end of the Knapp Road south. So I abut the whole side of it, and part of that private road is on my property. When I appeared before, my biggest contention was that they wanted to abandon Knapp Road. They're now not showing it abandoned on this final plat, and I don't understand exactly why. I understand Drew to say they do plan to abandon it at a later time, which I guess will be another issue. On that road, a portion of it is the county road, and the county has not abandoned its portion of that road. So that 1/3 of the road is still county road. The statutes on abandonment by a county do not include annexation by a city. Therefore, that's still county road. I've talked to the commissioners, and they still acknowledge it as a county road, that 1/3 end of it down there. So it's part city and part county, as I understand it. I pointed out about 8 deficiencies in that preliminary plat. Most of the same thing is still there, but the main thing we had a problem with was water drainage. At the time, Drew stood up when the question about the water and said it'd be addressed at a later time. And that's what the developer said. Well, it hadn't been addressed yet. The requirements for the plats on both the concept plat, the preliminary plat, and the final plat all require drainage information, which is not on this plat. It also requires a statement by an engineer, which is spelled out on the application, and that statement is not on the final plat. So the plat does not meet the requirements that the city has set down. And it also says that a plat will not be considered until all of that is complete. So this plat should not be approved at this time. And I think they need to address the drainage issues because it is a serious problem out there. Last week we had about 10 minutes of a heavy rain, and there was a lot of water coming out of there, enough that it washed out a portion of our road, and Mr. Johnson had to go fix it. So when this is partially covered, I suppose about 1/3 of it's going to be covered by roads, streets, sidewalks, buildings, and parking lots. You got a real problem there, and that goes directly into the city drinking water. And I think that ought to be resolved before this is all approved. And
Chairman, I can address
they approved that. Let me finish up here. I was going to, after I spoke to the city council on some other matters a couple of weeks ago, Steve Schulte and I met out there discussing a tract of land. He told me I needed to be a little more gentle with things, so I decided I'd take his advice and I'd be gentle tonight, and I'd say, please table this map, this plat, for a later time.
Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, Justin McDonald, 2956 Dry Hollow Drive, proud resident inside the city of Kerrville. I can address the concerns that Mr. Bilt has mentioned regarding the drainage, even though it's not really appropriate to do so as part of a final plat. Where's this? Our engineer has already started drainage calculations on the site, and you can see, if I can figure out how to work the mouse. Currently, there is a fair amount of drainage that does end up down here at the bottom on Mr. Bilt's property. As he said, it washed out his road, and it does that periodically. However, this new street, Teal Court, will actually be intercepting about 60% of the current water that goes across that property and redirecting it through the street system and into the drainage and down right here, where it will then go through essentially a natural filtering process before it hits the river. So we actually have addressed the drainage. The problem is that it's not part of the platting process. It will be discussed, as was mentioned by Drew, and as is also mentioned in the PDD ordinance that you're going to take up on the next item. It will be just addressed during the development site plan process and the building permitting process. And regarding Knapp Road, I do want to address that real quick. We initially wanted to abandon Knapp Road, but at this point we really don't care. I think the city would like to see Knapp Road abandoned because they required us to put a provision in our EIC funding agreement to dedicate trail to them that would be similar in location to where Knapp Road currently runs. But as far as we're concerned, we're happy either way. So that's why we took it out of the plat and are leaving it as is, and we'll let City Council decide what they want to do with that road later. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a bunch of other comments, but they're really more pertinent to zoning, but I can make them whenever the commission would prefer.
If they're preferable to zoning and don't apply to this, we just wait.
I'll hold it.
Drew, you have comments related to those comments?
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Well, I do have a question. Would you confirm that the information that Mr. Belta talked about is not required?
The final plat is complete at this time.
Okay.
I would recommend it for your approval.
Well, I still have a problem with Mr. Bilta's issue that, you know, if at some internal position down the road, if Knapp Road is abandoned, he's not gonna have access to his property.
And that would have to be addressed with the closure of the road. But since it is not being proposed to be closed, there is no direct solution for that.
Can I say something about that? We've been negotiating with the developers about an alternate access if it comes to the Knapp Road
Right.
question.
Thank you.
Knapp Road, that's really not an issue today,
That's correct.
but it has been put out there that drainage is required for the final plat. And so can you answer that question?
They have started their drainage study, but
No, I'm saying, does the city ordinance require drainage information?
there is information on the plat regarding the drainage that there has not been a detailed study completed. The completion of that drainage study is going to be the details of the site plan. To Mr. Bilto's point, the additional rooftops and paving and other impervious cover will impact that drainage study. So that'll have to be addressed on a lot-by-lot basis.
So it's not part of the final plat,
Right.
which okay. That's what we're clarifying.
Other questions? If not, I'll take a motion.
I'll make a motion, we approve the final plat as presented.
I have a motion, do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a second, a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed, same sign, passes 5-0. Thank you. Number 3, public hearing, consideration and action. Drew?
Thank you. Public hearing, consideration, and action to recommend an ordinance to change the zoning from District 7W to a planned district development on approximately 58.74 acres of land out of the Joseph S. Anderson Survey number 141, abstract number 2, and the J.S. Sayder Survey number 142, abstract number 290, within the City of Kerrville and generally located at the intersection of Thompson Drive and James Road. This property is within the catalyst area number 3 of the Kerrville 2050 Comprehensive Plan. For this area, the vision of this area was for mixed use and transitional residential uses, really directing itself and towards the river along Thompson Drive, the major corridor of this catalyst area. Again, this is the landing. Here's a copy of the concept plan, which includes the setbacks for each of these properties, includes the land use table and some of the density requirements. There's a comparison land use table from 7W to the PD. They're looking at custom manufacturing, greenbelt open space area, private park, professional office, public park, multifamily restaurant, general and retail trade 2. There's some photographs of the property as it sits today. Regarding the thoroughfare plan, Thompson Drive is a designated secondary arterial, which primarily serve local trips to moderate length and supportive circulation and access to localized areas with high traffic volumes, and connect to principal arterials. City may consider an alternate design, as currently this is a 2-lane, portions of this are 2-lane divided. Portions do not have the median and have a turn lane immediately adjacent to this property. We'll go through the draft ordinance you have in front of you. We do have a couple minor changes. So if you'll bear with me, we'll go through those changes real quick. Page 2, section E, floodplain improvements and maintenance. Just to change it, say a portion of the floodplain is to be dedicated to the city rather than the floodplain. Page 3, section I, the end of that open spaces section, striking and open to the general public. This is for lot 902, which is the private park. Section M for sidewalks. They're requesting a waiver for sidewalks along James Road.
Just a moment.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry, so that was to include sidewalks along James Road?
Exclude.
Ask for a waiver.
Okay.
On the right side going down towards the river.
Correct. Page 4, section Q. That the screening will be an opaque screen on one side, striking masonry. So material with a finished look like the adjacent buildings. Section R for outside storage and display, to add an exception on a temporary basis for construction-related purposes. And striking all of section T, floodplain improvements and maintenance.
All of T.
Yes. As Mr. McDonald mentioned, they do have an agreement through EIC for some of their utility installation funding. Part of that includes dedication of park space and a future dedication of a trail along the river, which would be through that private park, dedicating a public easement at the time requested from the city. That is part of their EIC agreement. Regarding the sidewalk on James Road, of course, we would like to see a sidewalk from Thompson to the park, which is at the end of James Road, would be the public part. However, with the current construction of James Road and the current drainage along James Road, not knowing what that future design would be, the construction of the sidewalk would be difficult. We don't know that the future design of James Road wouldn't be impeded by that existing sidewalk and end up being taken out and replaced at that time. The staff supports that waiver.
I have one question. Any of this area, does it infringe on the private drive?
No,
Okay.
it does not.
This is a sidewalk that goes from Thompson Drive all the way down to the park, to the,
Yes, that would have been where James Road is currently. The sidewalk on the west side of James,
on the development side.
on the development side, correct. And there is a drainage culvert from TxDOT right-of-way that runs down James Road. Pavement's fairly level with the grade there. So there is more of a sheet drainage as it goes down James Road. So the sidewalk may either impede some of that drainage, and then again, the future design of James Road has not been determined. So the exact location of elevation of that sidewalk, there is no curb and gutter. So the construction of that sidewalk would be difficult at this time.
But there would be sidewalks throughout the development
Yes,
down to the river.
that's right, thank you. They are proposing to build sidewalks on both sides of all of the public streets within the development. So there will be alternate walking path from Thompson to the park and throughout the development.
What would trigger improvements to James Road?
That would go on the city's paving plan and prioritized as they look through those, update those priorities annually.
To have a sidewalk, I mean, there's not gonna be parking on Thompson Drive.
Correct.
Draw your conclusion.
With that, staff recommends approval of the case, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
Okay, well, any questions for the public hearing elements? Okay,
Thank you.
I'll open the public hearing at 4:52. Anybody wishing to make comments, go to the podium, give us your name and address. I have 3 cards first. Go ahead, Justin, if you have some.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Justin McDonald, 2956 Dry Hollow. So the plans you've got in front of you are substantially similar to what was previously presented at our prior P&Z, EIC, and City Council meetings. The material difference has been mentioned. Road on the plans, and are planning on leaving that in place unless council chooses to take further action at a later date. I've heard a little bit from our neighbors, and I think you've been given some points of theirs regarding drainage. As I mentioned before, our engineers calculated that little or no water will be draining onto the Johnson property, and additionally that about 60% of the current drainage will be removed from the Bilta property. That is not what Mr. Johnson's packet that he has passed out says, but I can only assume that he misread our plans, because he's assuming that the water is flowing in a direction opposite of what it is actually flowing. We've been diligently working with these neighbors to mitigate their concerns about the development. We've been doing this over the course of almost a year now. We've made a number of concessions to them, such as deeding about $50,000 worth of property to them in that private road, and agreeing to additional development restrictions above and beyond city requirements. We've done this at no cost to them and have asked nothing in return other than to remove their opposition to our proposed plans. Some of those concessions include transferring those small strips between our fence line and the property line to those adjacent owners for nominal consideration, removing the small strips from the annexation request that we gave to the city, selling a portion of our property offering to sell a portion of our property to Mr. Bilta and Susan Corey at our cost to provide a buffer between our project and their property and more direct access to Thompson Drive, providing separate paved gated access points for each landowner, restricting the building height on lots adjacent to the neighboring properties, setting a 50-foot building setback on those same lots, building a privacy fence between our development and their properties, and utilizing downlighting to minimize light pollution. Those offers are on the table, and we plan to do that regardless of whether they stand up here and oppose us today or not. Additionally, I think they've also raised concerns about TCEQ and FEMA. Again, this is a zoning case. This isn't an engineering case, so floodplain determination is not really what we're talking about here today, but that will be addressed before those lots can be developed. I think that's per just about every city code in the book. As far as TCEQ goes, of course, when we start construction, we'll be filing the appropriate stormwater development permits. And regarding use of surface water and groundwater resources, filing drought contingency plans, we're not using surface water or groundwater, and we're not operating a private water system here. That's why the EIC grant was given to connect us onto city water down the road. So I'm not really sure where those are coming from, but we're, obviously not going to be required to do that. Regarding the environmental and aesthetic considerations that were in Mr. Johnson's packet, as I've said before to this group and to EIC and City Council, we're from here, we live here, we're planning on relocating our office to this site. We plan on being here for a very long time. We've got roots in this community 5 generations deep. I grew up here, I'm raising my daughter here, and we want this community and this development to look good and be part of Kerrville and maintain Kerrville's character for the long term. So we've taken all that into consideration. I don't think there's any Native American artifacts on the property. I haven't seen any endangered species out there. I've never seen a bald eagle or an osprey, and I've spent quite a bit of time out on the property. I do have a presentation that I want to show you all real quick regarding our PD request and the land uses. Again, I've given this presentation. I don't think I actually gave it to P&Z, but I've given it to EIC and Council. So if these look familiar to you, I apologize. So again, the landing is a roughly 60-acre mixed-use development planned along the banks of the Guadalupe River at Nemitz Lake. Our planned uses, as Drew mentioned earlier, boiled down a little bit. He was speaking in planning ordinance, zoning ordinance speak. I'll speak in kind of layman's terms. But luxury apartments, townhomes, office and commercial space, restaurants, bars and entertainment venues, craft artisans, and boutique retail. Again, here's a copy of our concept plan, which you've seen multiple times and is in your packet. This is a prior version of the concept plan, but it's still very similar. The only difference is that we are planning on locating our permanent office on this site, potentially either at this location or this location. So we left flexibility in there to allow office or restaurant on that particular site. Going through, here's our luxury apartment concept. For those of you that have seen our Orchard Grove apartments in Fredericksburg, it's very, very similar. They'll have hill country style architecture, masonry, gables, everything that makes it look like it belongs in the hill country. They're not giant hulking buildings. They're 2-story buildings, and I think they'll fit into the area very well. You'll be able to see around and over them to the river, even up from Thompson Drive. Our townhome properties, again, we've built 2 townhome properties in Fredericksburg, Sunrise Townhomes and Rolling Hills. It looks just like this, and I think we'll see something similar, although potentially a little bit more, even more on the luxury side, since those will be most likely for sale townhome units rather than rentals. Office and commercial, I've pointed to this before. This is Mr. Raymond's office building over on Lehman Drive, I believe is the street name. Again, lots of hill country design elements. That's what we want to have here, and that's what we're going to ensure that we have. Again, since one of the potential office sites is our own, we will maintain exclusive control over that. We're also currently working with our architect, Peter Lewis, to design development standards that will be recorded in deed restrictions for the entire development, not just for the office sites, that will ensure that those architectural elements are incorporated throughout the development. Restaurants, this is a picture that I found that I thought was really cool. It shows, waterfront dining. Think of, something like this. Think of, examples we've already got in town. Probably the only one I can really think of that takes advantage of the river would be Chili's, where they've got a nice patio overlooking the river. We would like to see that here. There's some other restaurant concepts, Hat Creek, Longhorn Cafe, that are very family friendly, outdoor kind of focused restaurants that, they're not one-offs, but they're not big national chains, and that's really what we're trying to get here. This is not going to be another fried chicken place or, fast food, but rather something that I think all of Kerrville can be proud of. Craft artisans, we've kicked this around a little bit, and we've got a few ideas here. We're thinking hat makers, boot makers, silversmiths, potentially microbreweries or winemakers. Things that, again, will draw people not just to our development but to Kerrville as the hill country kind of craft movement takes hold. I think we would like to be a part of that, and so we've designated a space on the property for that as well. And then again, a river park and river trail. We've already got great examples of this through the city-owned river trail, the system that's running through town, and we just want to expand on that. We've also been in talks with the city about the feasibility of putting in on the park location right here some kind of possible sailing or kayaking type facility, water sports that are not powered by gasoline engines, because those are obviously prohibited on Nimitz Lake for water quality reasons. But some way to make this more than just another park that gets forgotten about. But something that can really draw people, again, not just to the landing, but to Kerrville in general. A little bit about us. I think, I know most of y'all on the committee at this point, but we're based here in Kerr County. We're looking forward to be based here in Kerrville within the city limits very soon. We're a third-generation family business. We're owners and operators. We're not speculators. We have a long history of owning what we develop and being involved for the long term. We live here, so we have a great incentive to ensure that this is done right. We currently own and manage more than 3,500 housing units throughout Texas, including 1,200 throughout the Hill Country area, which is I'm defining as Kerrville, Kerr County, or counties that are contiguous to Kerr County. And we have more than 140 employees, including 41 in Kerr County, and we will actually be increasing that number after we relocate our permanent headquarters here. And there's our website address for anybody that's interested in looking up a little bit more about us or seeing pictures of our past work. So I'm happy to answer any questions at this point in time, or I can sit down and let somebody else talk. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your favorable consideration.
All right, I have speaker request forms. Got Mr. Bilta. Would you like to come back up, please?
I'm Jim Bilton. I live 1520 Knapp Road, adjacent to this property. My basic theory is if you don't own it, you can't control it. But then the government gets involved, and then you get a lot of problems that you wouldn't have otherwise on property. We think that their exemption of the sidewalk requirement over on James Road is proper. I think it'd be a real mess to try to put it in there because of the lay of that land, and most of that land over there is drainage along James Road. When it rains, that whole area is full of floodwater. So we think that exemption on that sidewalk is quite proper. About the only other thing that I would mention is that they've been very cordial in trying to accommodate in some manner things that bother us the most over there where we live close to it. And the one thing that I'd mentioned to them is that those tracks 14 and 15 should be limited to 2-story. It appears from his presentation that that's what they intend to do anyhow, but the proposal has a 60-foot height on those. And we think it ought to be reduced to 2-story or less than 60 feet there. if they wanna put 60 feet up on the highway, have at it. But, those that are right in front of our houses would like to, and there may not be any in front of mine because I'm probably gonna buy that hill that I have to look at anyhow. So basically, we don't have much of a problem with them, except for the water and the drainage. And the drainage is a serious problem out there. I wish y'all would go look at this. It's steep hillside. It drains the hillsides on the other side of Thompson Drive, and it's gonna be a considerable problem.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Johnson.
J.E. Johnson, 1524 Knapp Road here in Kerrville. Thank you for this opportunity to visit with you. First of all, I want to thank the Schultes, Mr. Schulte of McDonald's and their organization. Some of the information that he gave here just this evening, I was not privileged to, did not know. So much of the thrust of my concerns are apparently going to be alleviated. However, having turned some dirt myself, if you don't get it in the documents before this group and before City Council, there's an opportunity for circumstances beyond all of our controls to impact that. And all of a sudden, well, we can't quite get to the drainage, or we can't quite get to this, or get to that, or the other. So my concern is having this memorialized in the documents. A plat is basically a holy grail. This is what we're going to do here. And not having that reflected in that plat is of a concern to me. The spreadsheet that I gave you took a look at, number one, I am not an engineer, but I do have common sense. And Plummer once told me, what you flush goes downhill. And as long as you consider that, then you understand where we're coming from. What I took here was the information that was on one of the previous plats, I believe it was the utility plat. And on that document, using the square footage that is in these various lots, we were able to determine what that square footage was, and utilizing various information sources, particularly the engineering information sources from the City of Kerrville, I was able to come up with some square footages and the amount of water that would run off these various areas. I am going to draw a little bit of an exception to the direction that water flows on those sites. And the area in orange is the one of most concern to me. When one takes a look at a topographical map and you see that there's 1,700 feet next to Thompson Drive, and farther down it's 1,650 feet, that water's not going uphill, it's going downhill. And having lived at this location for close to 45 years now, I'm very much well aware of how that water runs off that hill, irregardless of what anyone else might say. Thus, when you take a look at those particular lots that affect us, in a 4-inch rain, you're looking at close to 2 million gallons of water coming off that hill. And that is an unusual circumstance to have a 4-inch an hour rain. But it's happened in this community, and it'll happen again. So unless there is some type of plan for controlling that stormwater runoff and retaining that stormwater runoff long enough for it to clarify a bit before it goes in that river, it's going to come off there in sheets. And I don't care what type of asphalt you've got, it's going to take it with it. There's a lot of weight there. Normally, let's take lot number 1. There's an opportunity for 39,000 gallons of water to run off in a 1-inch rain. 158,000 gallons in a 4-inch rain. Now that is undeveloped property. When you move over to the dark blue column, you're seeing what the possibility is in full development of the amount of water that's running off that lot 1. The same is true for the rest of the lots. And when you get down to the bottom line, the far right-hand bottom, there's a possibility of about 4.6 million gallons of water. I might ask that this group think about how much water the city of Kerrville consumes in a day. That figure right there is very close to that consumption rate. So at this point, before a lot of money is being spent by the McDonald's, because they're spending a lot of money, and I'm all for their development. I have been since the beginning of this. It's their property, they own it, and they're trying to make a top shelf property. What I'm pointing out is that before this thing gets too far along, it's a lot cheaper to deal with the water runoff now before it's populated with structures. So at this point, I'm asking, well, it's too late. You've already approved this plat. It's going through. But as this zoning changes and goes from a 7W zoning to this PPD zoning, which allows, I believe, a bit more dense activities, I would appreciate if there might be a little delay in approving until such time as these good folks can say, yes, we are going to deal with the stormwater runoff, and we're going to comply with state and city rules and regulations to control that. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeannie Berger,
I think this may be on the next.
is it for the next one? Okay. Kent Calhoun,
Ken Calhoun, 1249 Thompson Drive. I also support the development, but I probably am the only person in here that doesn't know what this 200-foot notification area is. And I just noticed that it does impact my property. And it's the red hash marks are drawn on my property, and I don't know how that's going to impact me tax-wise or legally, if I still can do what I want with that property. Maybe someone, since you've already approved this, I know y'all must know what this is. Can someone explain it to me?
That's a state-required notification area. We have to send notice to property owners within that 200 feet.
When am I going to get mine?
It should have been put in, or it was put in the mail, so.
Okay, I haven't received anything.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And we use the up-to-date information through the appraisal district,
Okay.
and then send those to the post office, so.
So, how does that impact? I mean, because I know Meyerstein over here, he has this.
Right.
This is,
So the actual zone change is within the solid line, so there's
So-
no direct impact
okay.
to you, but state feels that obviously you need to be notified, so
Does it change my taxes or anything?
that's an appraisal district function, that's not a city function.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. Thank you very much.
that's all right, thank you. Anybody else to speak for the public hearing? Justin?
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask our engineer, Ken Kolachny with Matkin Hoover, to come up and address some of Mr. Johnson's concerns about the engineering and drainage, if that would be
Good,
okay.
thank you.
Good evening. As
Good
Justin
evening.
stated, I'm Kim Kolachny with Matkin Hoover Engineering. And I would want to reiterate that, again, that this plating and zoning process, that's not where we necessarily address all the drainage issues, but we have started, moving forward with that. And we have certainly looked at drainage, and that will be addressed, as they said, at the site development stage with each lot. As part of the subdivision infrastructure, we are designing streets and the drainage infrastructure for them. I do want to point out that a good portion of the water that does eventually drain onto Bilta's property at natural drainage low, like I think Justin said, will be intercepted by the street, the Teal Court. Approximately 60% of that watershed will be diverted away from the Johnson and the Bilta property. So those sort of things have already been looked at, and of course will be further looked at as each lot is developed.
I have a question. Just in general purposes, state legal requirements are that you can't increase drainage onto neighboring property, but drainage that naturally occurs still could happen.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. We're required. I mean, the basic requirement is to not increase the rate of flow onto your neighbor above pre-existing conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, even just with installing the street Teal Court, we'll be reducing it significantly.
Right.
That's all I have. Any other
Thank you.
questions? Yeah.
Any other comments on the public hearing? Hearing none, seeing none, I close the public hearing at 5:16. Commissioners?
So take us through the process one more time, please, Drew. Their requirement is for this engineering on the flooding takes place lot by lot or overall or?
For the drainage?
Yes.
Yes, it would be lot by lot as they go through that development.
Okay. And the common streets and common areas will be engineered
Right.
as they're laid out.
That's correct.
Well, that's another approval process with the,
City Engineering
right.
Department.
So they would have to present their road plans with all their details and drainage requirements for the roads that they'll put in first.
That is correct.
And all of that's addressed and looked at and approved before any building permits are ever issued.
Also correct.
I have a question regarding the building height concern. When this becomes zoned as a PDD, all the other zoning requirements in the ordinance regarding commercial versus, and screening requirements, those are still in effect.
Correct.
Correct. Right. So the whatever building heights that are currently in the zoning ordinance would still be applied?
Well, they actually did specify a 60-foot maximum building height.
Okay.
If they hadn't specified it, what would it be?
Depending upon the use, anywhere from 35 feet for your residential uses to unlimited for some of the commercial uses.
Okay.
Obviously, you can't see it on this drawing, but in this list of requirements here, which is general requirements for the PD, and then the table specifically spells out some of the developable area, the density for the residential units. They did mention that there is a 60-foot maximum building height for the entire development.
So they have restricted themselves
That's correct.
outside of the zone, yeah.
Martin, can you pull that PDF up for me real quick? See if I can do this from here or not. I don't know if you can read that on your screen.
Mm-hmm.
So number 6, maximum building height shall be 60 feet. don't. They're maybe about 60 feet. Thanks, sir. Both tall stories and the parapet above that. 50 to 60.
Drew, do you know how that compares to what the ordinance committee's working on?
Off the top of my head.
Showed us that what they're working on with the height of the building compared to the distance away from the property line.
That's correct. Sorry. So one of the proposals in the new zoning code is kind of an increased setback based on building height adjacent to residential. So if a property were commercial adjacent to residential, it can only be 1 story within the normal setback for that zoning district, up to 50 feet from the residential property. After 50 feet, they can go to 2-story. That wouldn't change the maximum height. Still have, in some examples, a 35-foot tall building, but only serving 1 story. So that's one of the proposals, is to help eliminate that view and increase privacy for the residential property to the adjacent users, whether it's multifamily or commercial.
Well, I think the McDonald's agreed to do a 50-foot setback against that residential, the residential landowners there.
And Mr. Chair, we're also willing to stipulate to, say, a 35 or a 40-foot building height along those 3 lots. I believe it's 13, 14, and 15 that abut those neighboring residential properties. We'll be happy to make that change. I guess, can we make that change before we go to council with it, Drew?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Don't make it on 13.
It's on all of them.
Sometimes it's easier to express it, 1 foot of setback for however much foot of height you have.
Right.
Comes a little clearer. So what you're saying is, if you have 50 feet of setback and you can have a 60-foot building?
But if you go further, if your building's further than the 50 feet, then
You can
it's
have,
more than-
go 50 feet setback, and so you have 50 feet of height, 1 to 1?
Well, no, sir. What we're proposing in this PDD is that, again, in lots 13, 14, and 15 that abut the neighboring residential properties, we've agreed to have a 50-foot setback and a 35-foot total building
35,
height.
okay.
So we're not, it's not an either or, we're doing both and.
Okay.
Is that an amendment to the site plan or to this request?
You want to make that amendment or offering that amendment?
Okay.
That's at the commission's discretion. They're offering that.
I don't think we're the ones that need to say whether it's right or not. It's the neighbors, I guess, that have the concern.
Drew,
It'd certainly be satisfactory with us.
Drew?
Mhm.
Okay, on the parking lot lighting, reference to a shoebox style,
Right.
a lot of new lights don't fit that description. Is that just, what is that trying to say? Is it
A lot of different ways as that industry is progressing through the dark sky, night sky, full cutoff, no glare beyond the property lines. There's a lot of different language that we've looked at. I think to your point, the shoebox style would be fully shrouded. And if you look at even K-Pub's lights that they use, street lights, are dark sky compliant because they're fully recessed, but there is no shroud around them like you would see in some of the older styles.
The intent is to keep glare from
Right.
traffic.
No upward lighting, all down lighting.
Nothing above the 180 and nothing
Right.
above horizontal.
Correct.
Questions, comments? If not, I'll be open to a motion.
Before we do that, I do think it would be a good idea to restrict the building heights on 13, 14, and 15
Do we need to make that note?
And, you know, I don't know, I am concerned that, you know, just as an architect and being involved in construction projects, that 35 feet in a lot of instances is not very tall. Some of these townhomes probably might exceed 35 feet.
I would propose that we just go with what's coming down the pipeline in the 50-foot.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than restrict the whole lot.
It might be easier to limit those to 2-story instead of a height because of roof heights and design differences.
That's an option as well. Any objection there?
Okay, that allows a little bit more flexibility in what can be put on the property. So I guess I would make a motion to approve the PDD zoning with the exception that on lots 13, 14, and 15, structures cannot exceed 2 stories in height.
I have a motion. To have a second?
I'll second that.
Have a second. All in favor? Raise your right hand. That passes 5-0. Thank you. Thank y'all both for being so understanding of what each other's trying to do. Let's see, 3B, Drew.
Thank you. 3B is public hearing, consideration, and action to recommend a resolution to allow a conditional use permit for a standalone parking lot on approximately 0.89 acres of land, consisting of all of lots 369, 370, 371, 372, 373, and a portion of lot 374, block 52 of the Shriner Second Edition, more commonly known as 400, 408, 412, and 416 Jefferson. This is within the Central Business Zoning District, and the conditional use is the standalone parking lot. And here's the concept plan. This is within Catalyst Area Number 1 for downtown of the Kerrville 2050 Comprehensive Plan, which states there should be a strong focus on redevelopment and catalyzing a renewed public interest in the area. This parking lot is a part of HEB's rebuild of the store located on Main Street, directly across Jefferson from this property here. We've also included a tree survey and a preservation plan, and looking at the age of the trees, type of trees, diseased or invasive. They've indicated on this plan which trees they plan to keep and which trees they plan to take out with this parking lot. So the recommended conditions, as far as pedestrian accommodations, that a 5-foot sidewalk be installed abutting the property along Jefferson and Hay Street, tying into a high visibility crosswalk across Jefferson at the intersection of Hayes and Jefferson. The exterior lighting, all lighting fixtures employ permanent cutoff angle of 90 degrees or less and be positioned not to emit light above the horizontal plane of the fixture. The parking area must be screened from view from the public right-of-way along Hayes and Jefferson to a minimum of 3-foot height by a dense native vegetation and or fence or wall. Landscape screening may not interfere with clear vision at the intersections and driveways. Planted screens are encouraged to utilize native plant species and vary in height and density. In the tree preservation, 1/2 of all healthy or non-diseased and native non-invasive existing trees must be preserved unless the removal is necessary to provide utilities or pedestrian or vehicular access, but not parking. Some photographs of the adjacent properties, or excuse me, the subject property. Like I said, HEB is to the south of this across Jefferson for the new store mill.
Is this designated for employee parking?
That's correct, right?
It isn't going to be restricted, but our intent is that our employees will park across the street, yes.
This becomes more dangerous if you're pushing a cart across Jefferson.
Right.
Maybe don't use that parking lot, Bob.
Yeah, I wouldn't use that for sure.
I'd be pleased to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
Okay. Let's go ahead and start the public hearing. Yeah, it's 5:30. We'll open the public hearing. Anybody wishing to make comments to the commission, approach the podium, give us your name and address. And I have a request, Ms. Berger.
I'm not here, my name is Jeannie Berger, and my address is 2106A West Lane in Kerrville. I'm not here to address the parking lot per se, but the tree preservation item. I wrote a letter to Mr. Waller and why I am concerned about the trees on this property, and you'll find the letter on the reverse of page 35. And this is in regard particularly to two of the trees, and I noticed on attachment C that most of them have been marked for preservation. It's the large post oak.
Excuse me, just a second. Can you
Yes.
bring the picture back up?
Sorry.
Yes, thank you.
Listening
That'll
to you,
help
I'm
you
not paying
Thank
There-
you.
There it is. No,
The
photograph.
trees.
Photographs.
the next, there you go.
There we go.
Okay, it's the large post oak, and on attachment C, it's designated as tree number, I believe, 4288. It's the one in the very back, toward the edge, back edge of the building. And also that one. And also 4279. I always call this a catalpa tree, but I guess its proper name is the paperleaf mulberry. And both of those are marked for preservation. So I'm just hoping that HEB and whoever is designing the parking lot will keep this in mind. And I really appreciate the recommendation from Planning and Zoning to preserve these trees. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any other comments? Public hearing, hearing none, seeing none. I close the public hearing at 5:33. Commissioners?
I did drive by that lot just prior to this meeting, and that post oak in the back is a really cool tree. I didn't climb on it, but I really wanted to. And so I'm glad that is shown to be preserved.
Yeah, they're towards the front and the back. That makes it nice.
And Drew, that's not a suggestion, that would be part of this.
Yes.
Requirement.
Now, just for clarification, I went too far. The preservation plan is not part of the resolution, but the language describing the trees, I mean, this is their intent. But should anything change or one of the trees get diseased, what they're looking at is that other direction. That language there for the tree preservation is within the resolution. So yes, not a suggestion, it is a requirement.
Is there any way that post oak could be eliminated with this wording? I guess that's the tree we're trying to save.
Right.
We don't have a concern adding that particular tree. We've already committed to Mrs. Berger that we can save that tree, and it's our intent. So we need to be more clear on that particular tree. We're okay with that.
Okay. We can make those modifications before it goes to council.
You clarify that.
Mm-hmm.
Numbered on this thing, so.
Right, yeah, we've got the reference in the survey. Questions?
Yeah, comments?
Do we know where this came from?
Bill, do you want to make some comments on that?
I've had several people, pose to me, why couldn't they put in, as wide as the street is, to put angled-in parking on each side of that street? It would accommodate, I believe I was told about 200 parking spaces, and leave this other place for, commercial development after the project is done. I understand HEB wants to use it for a staging area for the construction of the new one. Tear down the building, use it for that. Let's don't pave it and leave it for construction
Right.
for commercial use after the fact. That's my concern.
Staff did look at that through engineering, and from a traffic engineering standpoint, the width of Jefferson and the amount of traffic along Jefferson would not be a safe situation to have angled parking on both sides of the street. Kind of hard to see here, but looking at the site plan of HEB, about this location here is going to be the drives for the semi trucks to come in the back of the store. The additional public drive will be a little further down the block. But with the amount of the volume of traffic on Jefferson, the width of traffic on Jefferson, would not be a viable solution in this location. There are other blocks of Jefferson that are more narrow, and that on-street parking does work well. But staff did take a look at that and would not give that a positive recommendation.
Going back to the 2050 plan, this seems to be somewhat in violation of proposals for the 2050. And in fact, removing it from commercial development, undeveloped properties now are supposed to be looked at for things of that nature, new development rather than paved parking lot.
Right, and this being part of the revitalization of HEB, taking that into consideration, with that HEB being a catalyst for this portion of downtown, on the edge of downtown, but this portion of downtown to be revitalized.
If you turn it into a paved parking lot, it's going to stay a paved parking lot.
Right, but it serves as a catalyst for the adjacent properties for development.
Because HEB is not restricting that to only their employees, if there's other development that happens along Jefferson Street, I'm assuming that parking would be available to somebody.
But it'd be private
I'm not
agreements.
sure
but-
it's public parking.
Yeah, it wouldn't be public, but that'd be up to them.
Yeah,
Just for clarity's sake,
right.
it's our preference to have parking that we know will be there. We're building this store, we're gonna be here for a long time. So we get really uncomfortable relying on on-street parking because it might be here today and in 10 years it might go away because we don't own it. It's not ours. That's why we're proposing this, because this is a definite certain. It is critical to the size of the store that we want to put adjacent to the property. The store's too big, and we need the parking. So that's why we're here before you today, because this is critical to being able to build the store the size that we would like to bring to the community. It isn't going to be restricted, fenced off or to that nature, but one of the reasons why we would also lean towards owning the property and owning where our parking is that if we do have a lot of other businesses parking in our parking lot, we can put a fence around it and we can secure it just for our partners so that our store actually does benefit from it. So we wouldn't go in doing that because we don't anticipate it to be a problem, but I don't want to lead anyone astray. We do think about those things because we don't know what the situation will be and what the adjacent developments will be in 5 or 10 years. And that's a solution we've employed in other areas where we've had if you put a restaurant right next to us and then it's underparked, they're going to be parking in our parking lot. So we're sensitive to adjacent uses that might come through here. So it is possible at some point in the future, if parking becomes stressed in this area, that we might elect to put a fence around it so that it does benefit our store. And that's how we would leverage it as opposed to on-street parking. And we certainly don't have any concerns with the on-street parking, with the exception, or with the careful consideration for where our trucks come in and out. So, and we visited with Drew on where we think the sensitivity areas are, but that certainly complements our use if that's something that the city wanted to pursue.
Thank you.
A couple of things, Hayes Street is, that's gone, that's gonna be, okay. And so I think I saw some of the early renderings, the trucks are gonna come down Jefferson and go, stop back in on the, I don't think you're gonna have it.
I don't think I have it in there, no.
Well, we have two different truck paths. One, we have the main trucks on the back of the store that will enter from
The back being,
The back is about where Hayes Street
okay,
is.
right, all right.
Okay,
Roughly.
So we have trucks that are gonna enter on Main Street and exit on Jefferson. And then we have another truck dock that's on the Jefferson side where trucks will enter and exit off of Jefferson. So we've tried to keep the movement, the truck movements off Main. That was also a request as well. So it's that northeast corner of the new store tract where we would just wanna make sure that our truck paths are.
Well, yeah, you see the swing, you know, if you're, okay. So the actual structure of the store is about where Hayes Street is now? So the space you have, but.
The front of the store, as we're seeing it today, is right on where Hayes Street is.
The front of the store?
The front.
Okay, all right, all right, just,
The front of the store actually overlaps the existing store.
right, it'd have to be.
Okay.
They're gonna be on top of each other. But if you want, for reference, the new store front door will be more or less where Hayes Street is.
Okay, so the back, quote unquote, the area you're talking about is.
Further back here.
It's the east,
About, yeah, to the,
by
yeah.
the newspaper.
On that diagram, you're about where the C, the CBD
Yeah,
lettering
right
is?
there, yes.
Oh, the loading dock will be by the newspaper, basically, okay.
All right, go back to the lot that they're talking about, the back side of that lot, there's not a dedicated alley or anything there. That property line is indeed the back property line of the existing buildings and businesses that face on Shriner.
That's
Is that
correct.
correct? Okay. So moving 10 years out from now, you could see some sort of business. I don't think the sign company's gonna have that much traffic or whatever, but on Shriner, facing on Shriner, that would back to their parking lot,
Correct.
which they would probably at that point in time put your fence up.
If we need it.
Well, aren't they required to put at least a 3-foot fence?
Along Jefferson and Hayes.
Just Jefferson is, okay. Okay.
Yeah. Or vegetation.
Nothing down the north side
Right.
at this point in time.
That's correct.
You had mentioned a crosswalk. Is that gonna have a signal with it?
No.
Or, okay.
I know y'all have been working on your traffic study and including this crosswalk as part of that study. We're just recommending that it go at the intersection of Hayes, so it is not a mid-block intersection. But at this time, we're not anticipating any signal or anything of that nature. Just high visibility.
You could do what they're doing in San Antonio with those floating. Have
Oh,
you
right.
seen that? Those are, I like that.
Optical illusion on
Yeah,
the paint.
exactly. Any other questions?
Seems to me that the reason we made parking lots conditional use is to determine if they fit within that area.
Correct.
Right across the street from the HEB parking lot, so seems to pass that test.
Well, I think it's important to reiterate, if we're revitalizing the area with a bigger, newer, funner HEB, you gotta have parking. You can't revitalize an area without a place for people to park.
And we're experiencing that right
We
now
are,
with
all
the
over.
existing store, so.
And-
So I think everybody is aware of the of the situation that's created when there's not enough parking.
And to the point, Mr. Zuber's point, the conditions furthermore justified the conditional use permit for those standalone parking, so we could address things like the tree survey and the screening, what's appropriate for that area. Yes, sir.
When the store is finished, is there not going to be an additional 200 parking spaces in the new parking lot?
Is that 200 sound about right?
There is, I don't remember the exact number.
I heard about 200.
We are providing, we tend to overpark our stores by code, because you know how it is on holidays. It gets kind of crazy. So there's what the rest of the commercial world thinks parking is, and then there's what HEB needs. So there is adequate parking on the lot itself. We just know that from our years of business, doing business, that there's times of the year where our parking lots are not pleasant. And so so we have our own parking need that we assess based on the size of the store. And we have a desire to make this store bigger than what will actually park on the property that it's sitting on. So that's what, it's a math equation that we just needed a few more parking spaces.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I never got you identified. I'm assuming you're with.
I apologize. I'm Kathy
What's that?
Campbell with HEB.
Thank you.
Addressed this before, thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm ready for a motion.
I'll make a motion that we allow the conditional use permit as presented with the one addition of the large post oak being observed.
Whether one or two trees.
Mainly
We
one
wanted to
post oak, right?
There are two, but they are noted as being preserved.
Okay.
Oh, the other one is, okay. What was the other tree? It was
Yeah, they were both preserved.
One's in the
That
front,
mulberry at the front.
Can we
one's in
identify
back,
it?
one's in front.
I can't read, it's too small, but
Can I address that one?
Yes.
That one we are showing as preserved, but it's in decline and it's an
Yeah.
invasive species.
Mm-hmm.
And our concern with while we're going to preserve it, our concern is that it may not live that much longer. That's why that's why the wording is the way it is. And so we're showing it preserved, but it is an invasive species, so it actually doesn't fall into the math that we're talking about.
yeah,
So I just want to be a little bit careful about what we do with that.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not
My
in
motion
great
is-
shape.
my
It's older than me.
motion is just for the post oak then.
Which is tree number, what?
Can anybody read that?
4288,
A gnarly one.
number 4288.
That's the one you want to climb?
Correct, just protect that one.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
And we have a second. All in favor? Raise your right hand. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Staff report. Thank y'all.
Kathy, I'd like to see you a minute before you leave.
I think for the staff report, we have the code review committee meeting on May 9th to look at the second draft of the zoning code, and the open house May 16th.
You talking about the code review?
Yes. Open house is May 16th at the Diedert Center at 5 o'clock.
While the code review committee is meeting
Code review committee meeting is May 9th
at 4?
at 4 o'clock here, or upstairs conference room. May 16th is the public open house
Okay,
at 5 o'clock at the Diedert Center.
okay.
Development Services successfully launched our new permitting software. Are still working through a few minor bugs here and there, as with any new software launch. But we went live on April 22nd. So we've permits are now, you can apply for your permits online, tablet, phone, computer, get pretty up-to-date information on your inspections and where the inspection results as you go through the construction process. Throughout the rest of the summer, we're looking to bring on code enforcement, environmental health for restaurant permits, or primarily restaurant permits. And then later on in the summer, looking at bringing on planning cases. So all of that'll be digital applications and processing.
The permit was granted before it came online, it stays off the system, is that right?
That is correct. We did kind of muddy the waters a little bit on our staff side. If it went through plan review prior to go live, but we had not issued the permit, we went ahead and issued through the new software so that we could utilize those inspection processes. Yes, if you already have a project under construction, you still have to call in for your inspections, and not quite as user-friendly, but there was, working with the software company, said they have not had any successful conversion mid-project. It just was not worth the hassle. So right now we are working in 2 systems until we get those last few projects finished up. So if you're building anything, go
Drew,
fast.
can you restate the times on the 9th and
Yes.
16th?
May 9th, the code review committee is at 4 p.m.
That's
upstairs.
here?
Upstairs conference room here at City Hall.
Okay.
Excuse me. And May 16th is 5 p.m. at the Dietert Center. And May 16th is the open public house. So similar to the comprehensive plan process, we'll have different boards up with the zoning map, some boards up with the new land use table, because it's a little lengthy to try to print on 8.5 by 11 handouts at this point. We did work with the committee to build a comparison table of some of the old uses and the new uses to see where those districts line up a little better. One of the big takeaways that the code review committee recommended was less conditional use permits. As we've gone through several iterations of those, if they go through this process successfully most of the time, why aren't we looking at permitted uses at that point and just making sure our regulations track them accordingly? So
Uh-oh. Storm coming.
Yep. One of the other
Weather alert.
big additions that you'll see on the land use table is
Oh,
going
yeah.
from that list of 30-something uses up to over 200 listed uses. So a little, going for more detail for more clarity. And then reducing from 49 districts down to 17 zoning districts. So, looking forward to that. If you guys have any questions, feel free to catch us, email us, come by the office. We'll be
Thank you.
happy to go through that.
So, the ninth meeting takes place of our next P and Z meeting? Or do we have another P and Z
Oh,
meeting?
next one's scheduled for the 16th, I think.
We do not have anything on that agenda for the 16th, so the next meeting will be June 6th. And we do have at least one case scheduled for that. Just one. Of Plat.
All right. Any other business?
Yes, can you give us a timeline on the Chamber of Commerce sign? I mean, all I know is what I read in the newspaper. So, I mean, ticket given, ticket,
They went to court on Monday. The ticket was dismissed because they have modified the
why
sign.
was the ticket issued?
They were running the sign at full screen on at least 2 occasions that I know of. So they have, my understanding is they rewired the sign so that it physically cannot go full screen no matter what they try to program through it.
Okay.
Simple programming, if they don't modify the size, could go full screen in a hurry.
Right. So what, I'm sure they'll look at that as the sign code goes through the code review committee as to what those changes
You know,
are.
I thought that's what the situation was, that they were to run it at the 32-foot square foot level until.
Right.
And so they were issued a ticket, and then the ticket, when they corrected the.
Corrected the issue.
Can I get that, Laurie, the next time I get a traffic ticket, please? I
So
promise not to do it again, okay.
Yep, slow down after that, right?
Yeah.
The code review committee is gonna take their first look at the sign code on the 9th. Kind of get some direction. The consultants are gonna get direction from the committee and start drafting those changes. One of the things that we already passed along to the code, or to the consultant, is some of the discussion this board had regarding the chamber sign and the request for the Calvary Church sign. Not set on a 50% breaking point, but that was kind of the general basis somewhere in there. Moving to a percentage, they're looking at those comparisons that we presented to you, as far as other cities ranging from 0 to 100. We know we're not at 0. We know we're not at 100. So they're going to be looking at that, and then going through some other updates with the code review committee. Hopefully moving that along pretty quick.
All right, thank you. Any other business? If not, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.